Hello and welcome to Follow Everton. Tonight we've got an amazing show. I've got three brilliant guests waiting to come on, including the Fan Advisory Board Chairman, Jazz Bal, Dave Kelly, who's well known in the Everton community, and of course our very own Mr. Andy Mabbs. So let's bring them all in now, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening watching us. Hi guys, how are we all?
Yeah,
all good here, thanks.
Yeah, brilliant.
Pleased we've been able to get you all on. It's an honour and a privilege to speak on behalf of everyone on Follow Everton to bring you both on. I know you must be very busy, guys. I'm going to go straight to you, Jazz. Obviously, you've just been over in America. How did you find the experience being there, so close to players as well?
Yeah, a bit of background. I think you asked me how I found the experience of being over in America.
Yeah.
So it was brilliant, to be honest. It was we sort of had to hedge our bets a little bit because when the original plan was made, the club had committed to doing events in Washington, Baltimore, and Minneapolis. So I think we struck it lucky, really. We flew into Washington on the Thursday, and then there was an event that night. The Men in Blazers do. So Men in Blazers is probably the most followed sort of football podcast over in America. It's one of the actual hosts is a lad from Allerton, so just around the corner from me and you, Ryan. Name's Roger Bennett, and he sort of influences a lot of Americans into sort of convincing them into supporting Everton. So that was on the first night, and I think what was really pleasing to see was that there was Frank Lampard was there, so the event was billed as Men in Blazers meets Frank Lampard, but there's also sort of team representation there as well. So we had sort of Tim Howard as an ambassador, we had Jordan Pickford, Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Anthony Gordon. So that was like a brilliant event to sort of kickstart the tour, I suppose. From there, the next day we headed over to Baltimore. So then the Baltimore Toffees had a welcome event on that evening. So it was obviously a few drinks, whatever else, and get to know everyone else. Then on the Saturday was the actual match day, so got to experience the tailgate parties, which is basically an all-day bender with a barbecue to make sure that we're not too drunk when we get into the stadium. But then the fan base over there were great as well. So they had obviously seen all the work at the end of last season in terms of sort of welcomes on Goodson Road and whatever else. And there's a march over to the pitch with smoke bombs and flags and whatever else.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Then obviously, then in the stadium, I suppose that's where it went downhill for 90 minutes. But as Everton normally does, let you down when we made all this effort to get to the matches. But you know what, I thought the second half was a lot better than the first half.
Yeah, overall experience, and you could say that it was really nice to see such good engagement. And I know that's something, being part of the Fans Forum. Of course, you were the chairman of the Fans Forum for a few years. You know, you'll be pleased to see that level of engagement. And I know that's something you've pushed for, building your connections globally. But of course, in the UK, and one thing I've certainly thought about, and I know you've touched on this in a private message, why would we not have anything like that here in the UK? Why do I have to go across the Atlantic Ocean to get close enough to a player and to see any of those events? Do you think that's something that the club could look to integrate? And I'll bring Dave in on this if Dave wants to answer that, perhaps.
Yeah, I think in fairness to the club, I think it's dead easy for people on the outside looking in to criticise the club. But I certainly think over the last couple of years, they've made giant strides. And I think the board themselves need to be applauded for the way they've grasped the nettle with the Tracy Crouch fan-led review stuff and got the Fan Advisory Board up and running. And I think over the last 12 months, I think a lot of people put a lot of time in with the Everton Stakeholder Supporters Group, throwing up references and putting a schedule in place whereby there'll be engagement literally with any Evertonian with a customer reference number was eligible to play a full and active part to actually get themselves nominated independently if they didn't belong to an official supporters group. So yeah, the club do get things like whether by design or default, depending on what agenda you're looking to promote. But personally, as I said, over the last 12 months or so, I think we made giant strides.
Would you say, though, that it would be nice to have something like the fan events that we saw over in America here for the UK fans? Would you see that as something that could go down well? Obviously, that would be very heavily subscribed, but it would be nice to have a little bit more of the connection on a local level, perhaps.
Well, I think, again, in fairness, I think one of the biggest problems of going to a match is everyone's got their own pre-match routine. No better than most, given that I put my fan support and food banks head on. I'm outside the ground 3 hours before kickoff, before the road closures come into play. But fans tend to go to the same pub and the same chippy and the same bookmakers. So whether standing in Stanley Park or the fan zone on a wet November afternoon, having what did you call it, a tailgate party?
I mean, is that coming back this season? Does anyone know the fan zone?
Yeah. And again, to give the food bank a little plug, be rude not to.
Of course, help yourself. You do an amazing job. So
the food bank will be in the fan zone on Friday night doing a collection. So yeah, the fan zone will be open. I think, in all honesty, I think the fan zone is the equivalent to a tailgate party. Not too sure how the club would react if we turned up with mobile barbecues and started grilling a load of burgers. But yeah, I suppose that's an L4 equivalent to what goes on in the States.
I'm talking more about. Sorry, Mabbsy. I'm talking more about some of the. I'm going to move on from that in a moment, but just what we saw over there, where, for example, Jazz, you were on stage next to Frank Lampard, and it was just nice that the fans were so close to people being interviewed. I wouldn't propose that in a sort of a match day setting, obviously, but maybe one or 2 days a year. That would be quite cool to get a couple of players maybe there, and you could come along and have some integration there.
I mean, I think the club did do something for, didn't they, who had 4 credits, I think, in 2009 pre-COVID, where they had the away day, and I think they were taking on coaches, and then, I think they met a few of the players. So they do happen. But obviously, credits is obviously a big... should I say? I mean, because not everybody who has 4 credits, goes to every game, and everyone has commitments, and we get that. I mean, to say it is what it is, isn't it? I guess, but
I don't think COVID's helped either, has it? So certainly before COVID, these used to be events under the open training. I think they had an open training session at the end of this year, to be honest. And they used to have the when like the AGM was on, the film on a call, there used to be players there, and like the younger fans and older fans could all get there, get their photos taken.
The Dixies as well.
Yeah, the Dixies, and I think there's also a sort of gala dinner a few years as a sort of fundraiser for everything in the community. But again, it's just making sure that everybody does have the access, because I suppose the only way to guarantee access at the moment is wait by the park end at the end of a match day, or get yourself to Finch Farm. It's obviously doable now because the weather's okay and the kids aren't in school, kind of thing. But I think anything that can sort of bolster the sort of direct interaction between fans and supporters would be brilliant.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jazz. Moving on, obviously, I've got loads of people in the comments. If you're just joining us, Jazz is the Fan Advisory Board chairman, newly elected, and he was also the Fans Forum chairman, and he's my neighbour as well. And Dave is well known in the Everton community with his work with food banks, including one northeast of the border as well, Dave, I believe now. Is that correct? In the northeast?
Yeah. I'm also on the Fan Advisory Board as well, Ryan.
Of course, I was coming to that. And I'm newly elected on the Fan Advisory Board, which is something I know you're very proud of. I've got questions for you both. First, of course, in the comments as well, and I've got my own questions that I think the fans are going to want to listen to, but just very quickly, people just dropping in, saying good evening. We've got Rich in the comments, Chris, I've got Matthew Howard, and there's several others, Chloe, Damien, Andy Reid is saying, evening all, hello, Jazz.
So it's actually, as he was corrupting me when we were over in America. Yeah. Andy likes a beer as well.
He doesn't like a beer.
Thanks for dropping on, Andy, and I've got Scholars Counts TV as well in the comments and other people. So thanks for joining. So Jazz, first and foremost, obviously, your connection with Everton is really strong, and you must be extremely proud to be the chairman of the Fan Advisory Board. it's a connection, you'd hope, between the fans and those above us. And obviously the board, the hierarchy, everyone in there has come under criticism, ultimately because results on the pitch haven't been good enough to what we believe they should be. But on that, first and foremost, I want to ask you, how did you end up becoming part of the Fans Forum? And sort of tell us a little bit about how you grew through that process.
Yeah, so going back to sort of 83, 84 season was my first ever game, Tuesday night, rainy night in Goodison against Leicester. We actually went 1-0 up with Kevin Richardson. Then Gary Lineker scored a penalty for Leicester, equalised 1-1, and then Andy King missed a pen for us. But do you know what? We finished the season well. We won the FA Cup, and that obviously set us up for the sort of European adventure a year later. But then I fast forward a few years, I joined the army in '96. So sort of left Liverpool, sort of travelled the world, came home sort of 3 times a year until 2014, which was when my eldest was about to start school. So my wife, my 2 daughters, we all settled back in Liverpool. First thing I bought was my season ticket, and then I got back into sort of regularly going to the match. Luckily back then there wasn't a waiting list, so I could get straight back in, and I got a seat with like 5 of my mates. So then that sort of built the adventure. And then a few years after that, so we're probably talking tail end of 2018. I had a bit of capacity around sort of work and family life. And I saw the advert in the Echo to consider applying for the Fans Forum. So I thought to give that a go. Fast forwards to the February 2019, I attended my first meeting. Then after a year on the forum, I then got elected to be their chair, and then got re-elected the year after that as well. So sort of a whistle-stop tour through in the sort of the pre-Fab days.
And I know you know a friend of mine, Steve, as well, who was actually
Stevie, like.
Yeah, he goes as Steve Blue. Actually, Follow Everton as a brand has been going since 2014. No, 2007. Sorry, I'm feeling old. I was 13 years of age when I first made an Everton website on the school IT computers, and we had a message forum on there. We had 200,000 posts on there, and Steve Blue was one of the commenters, and we managed to reconnect. And he was obviously under you. On the.
He was a peer. He was a peer. We were all peers.
Said you were. He was with you, and he said you were a brilliant guy. So you've achieved a lot, obviously, on the Fans Forum. What would you say your highlights were?
Wow. I don't know. I think COVID was very hard. A lot of sort of organisations sort of stopped working. I think I'm pretty proud that we managed to keep going right the way through COVID. We only missed 1 meeting, which was the March 2020. So that was very, very early on, and that was literally just because we'd just gone into lockdown. So I think the fact that we managed to keep going through lockdown, continued engagement, trying to work on things that were achievable, even though fans weren't in the ground. So whether that was what the TV product looked like, I suppose, in terms of like the seat kill banners and another opportunity to try and keep fans interacted into Everton, even though we couldn't physically go to the match.
Mabbsy, on that, Jazz talks about the banners, the atmosphere, improving the stadium, because we're obviously sitting in the Park End. The atmosphere wasn't good, was it, for a long period? Not necessarily down to the football. Obviously, that is linked. But do you think they've made some big strides in terms of trying to lift that atmosphere?
Absolutely. I mean, I think everyone has cobbled together and for the last few games of the season, where we did need that the 12th man cliche. The fans got this team through. Honestly, I'm not going to give the other players get some credit, but obviously the fans, everyone united. There was no. I think as very much of a fan base, we've been very much fractured since Carlo left. But with the flags, the banners, I mean, I was sceptical. I'm not going to lie to you. With that, I was wrong. I thought it was a very kind of thing to do, but I think the way we have come together, but then it's just, I think it's fractured, but we come together for the team, haven't we? And now, again, it seems to be drifting off in all sorts of directions. The cracks are still there.
Thanks, Mabs. Much appreciated. So part of that, obviously, in your role on the Fans Forum was about improving the atmosphere. And you could say that helped. And obviously, a lot of independent fan groups and stuff have contributed together. certainly towards the end of last season, when everyone pulled together to try and support the team as best as possible, you could say that really the team didn't deserve that level of support. I mean, you go to a lot of the away games. Jazz, I remember I saw you at Wolves away. We were getting annihilated. We had Kabam in midfield, and they were passing through us. And I remember speaking to you at half time. And really, you could say that the fans, the players didn't really deserve what they got from the fans. But it's a credit to this magnificent fan base that we were able to help push them over the line and stay up. Before I go to Dave and obviously open the floor to comments, you transitioned obviously with the Fan Advisory Board. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm involved with Everton through the YouTube channel and through social media, and I looked at that and I thought, I'm not going to apply for that right now, because I'm actually sure, although the stadium, it's important to perhaps have input on what's going with the new stadium, and it's a pivotal time. I thought also with the way the team was doing, it's not. I thought for me that wouldn't be the right time to get involved with something like that. So brave, obviously, the two of you to go on there in a time when the club is experiencing a lot of criticism commercially. You know, you can't get a kit in Ireland. People are frustrated about kit availability, frustrated about little things. You know, pre-match there isn't anything happening at the moment. Club performance is poor commercially. You know, you look around and deals other clubs are getting are better than ours. So it's a difficult time to be involved. But tell me about that transition when that opportunity came up. First to you, Jazz.
So
something you had to do. Did you feel?
So basically, this is all led from 6 teams trying to ruin football in the country and potentially globally. On the back of that, the fans turned around and said, "Look, we're not standing for this." And that, I suppose, was the catalyst then to put a government-sponsored fan-led review of football, which obviously, as Dave said before, Tracy Crouch MP sort of led the process for that. And I suppose that the way that transitioned, that was the creation of the Fan Advisory Board was because fans have got an interest in the strategic direction of the club, which isn't necessarily to do with the on-field performance. So I suppose you could turn around and say it's the strategic off-field activities as opposed to either the on-field sort of the whole sort of director of football side of the house or the operational level as well. So where you mentioned before about kits in Ireland, for example, that you could that'd be classed as an operational level. So within the Fans Forum, they have a retail group, and that's the kind of issue that they'll be dealing with on a sort of daily basis. Then there's other sorts of organisations there on the same level as them. So we have the Sports Club Committee, which is the voice for sort of domestic sports clubs. You have an international group, sort of predominantly focused on the American market at the moment. But I believe there are plans in place to sort of extend that to sort of different geographies as well. There's the Heritage Society, the Disabled Sports Association, and all these groups are sort of working on operational sort of match fan-facing issues. Above and beyond that, the only organisation that was sort of having any interaction at the strategic level was the Shareholders Association. So it's a very similar construct if you look at in terms of the sort of battle rhythm that they have, where they have an executive committee, they'll have monthly independent meetings, and then on a quarterly basis they'll be meeting with the board.
And that doesn't happen anymore, does it?
No, it does. Yeah, it's just the general meeting has been cancelled for now.
Right.
But in terms of the shareholders exec committee, that's still going strong. So I think
there's still communication between the club and the shareholders then.
So not well. There is a sort of push email from the club to all the shareholders who are on their database. So I believe there's approximately 2,000 sort of minority shareholders, if you like. However, there's a shareholders association, which is the oldest one in the world, to be honest, and that's chaired by a guy called John Blaine. He does a lot of photography, TV stuff. Yeah. And your two guests today are also members of that exec committee as well. But we all meet on a monthly basis and then also quarterly with the club as well.
Of course.
I suppose it's a similar level as that, but it's just good that we have got the support of the club. Now the Premier League have announced that it will be a Premier League initiative, and all clubs are to have something like that in place. But I think the beauty of what Everton have allowed the fans to do is to make it sort of fan-led process. So we are a group of, it's supposed to be 11, it's actually 10 at the moment. 6 are these sorts of operational groups that I mentioned a moment ago, and then there's 4 fans directly elected from the fan base, which Dave and myself managed to scrape over the line and get our positions. But if you look at the other sorts of models, you've got Arsenal and Man U, who have a joint joint board between the club and sort of representatives of their trust and the sort of the bigger supporter organisations. Chelsea did elect 3 fans onto the board, but I believe, to be honest, I'm not sure, so I don't want to speak about it, but I'm not sure whether that's still in place now that the change of ownership that they've had. Liverpool, so Split to Shankly have headed up their process, and then they've got sort of 16 positions on their board. 10 of them are for Spirit to Shankly, and then they've got sort of other organisations coming in. So I think maybe like Spy on Cop, the Disabled Sports Association, and a few others. But the beauty of what we've managed to do here is make it a fan-led process. We consulted through the fan base right through this whole process, made the recommendations to the club. The club turned around and said, "Yeah, you can have it." And then that got to the process then where the fan advisory board was created.
Fantastic, Jazz. That's brilliant. And I've got questions just on the back of that as well that I'll come to in a moment. Things like, did you get to attend board meetings? What are your objectives with that? And Damien's comment as well, which I'll just come through in a moment. But just before that, Dave, can I just welcome you onto the channel and say congratulations on getting on the fan advisory board. You've been involved in activism on a football level. I know you were involved with the Keith Everton in the Community campaign, the Blue Union. You were part of the 20s Plenty to try and keep away ticket prices. Was that correct? At £20 a game. So I know you've got some strong opinions as well, some which I don't necessarily agree with. I'm not going to lie. You talked about the stake partnership. I would ask you, is it more important to be a good moral club or a successful club? But I want to give you a little platform now just to tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing and how you came about being on the fan advisory board.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ryan. I think I've been involved in fan activism, if you like, for an extremely long time. Probably first came to prominence during the Keep Everton in Our City campaign, which it was the chair of the group. And it's something that I'm immensely proud of, to be honest with you, that a group of match-going fans actually took a Premier League football club, the biggest retailer in Europe, and a local authority to a public inquiry and beat them. Otherwise, we'd now be playing in the Polish Bowl in Kirby. So I think that was a significant achievement, and I think it was.
Well, that wasn't strictly true, was it? Because that was more to do with the government declining it because of the likes of Liverpool and the surrounding areas competing about the retail space, which I think was a bit bittersweet. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that Kirby didn't happen, but it was more to do with the government calling in and then knocking it back, and then chose not to appeal.
Well, absolutely, and I don't disagree with that. But the point to make, and I will make it, is that if a group of match-going Evertonians got themselves together and actually met with Bill Kenwright and Keith Minus at the time and actually told them that the plan that they were looking to put forward, the plan they were looking to promote, wouldn't get through the planning process because it run a coaching horses through local, regional and national legislation. We assured the club that it wouldn't be us that would stop it. It would be the governments that would stop it because of that. And that's exactly why. To be honest with you, our sole aim in the whole of that Keep Everton in Our City campaign was to get the other local authorities to call it in, to contact the Secretary of State and call it in because it was inappropriate. You'd have had a situation and a scenario. I actually live in Kirby. So you've got a town with an infrastructure for 40,000 people. The township of Kirby was doubled in its population.
Yeah, but I'm not getting into the ins and outs of Kirby, but obviously you've got the retail space that's coming in now. So, surely the statement would have complemented that. I mean, as I say, this is all.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
I'll tell you one point that it's probably worth asking Dave as well. Dave, whereabouts did you have your meetings as Keep Everton in Our City?
in various places.
So I believe you also used to use the Bramley-Moore pub.
Well, we did. To be honest with you, Jazz, one of the problems with having the meeting, we had meetings in the Black Horse. We had them in the Oak. We used to hold regular meetings in the Bramley-Moore pub. We also used to have meetings up in Kirby as well. And as far as I'm concerned, every single person who was involved in that campaign, without wanting to labour the point, during the planning process, the transport plan was totally unfit for purpose. And when the club and their advisors were talking about crush loading fans onto trains to get them to disperse quickly after games, to actually say that in a city like this was wrong. It was totally
totally shouldn't have said that.
And it was flawed on so many points. I'm passionate I'm 64 years of age. For 62 of them years, I've lived in Kirby. I'm really proud of Kirby as a town. Gets a lot of bad press. Most of it totally uncalled for. But for a town the size of Kirby to have a Premier League football club with 40-odd thousand fans coming into it every other week wouldn't have worked. It just wouldn't have worked. And
would have been a disaster.
And if we had gone to Kirby, we wouldn't have that splendid stadium that's getting built on the blank.
Well, this is it, with the banks and the Royal Blue Mersey. So yeah, absolutely. So let's move forward now to
So for 12 years, I was also on the National Council of the Football Supporters Association. I played a major part in the 20s Plenty campaign, which finally put a price cap on away tickets.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it was a really great campaign. Proud of the fact that campaign was basically run from this city, because there was only ourselves and the Spirits of Shankly who got out, lobbied the Premier League sponsors in Barclays. I remember rocking up outside Barclays in Church Street with a banner and a letter for the CEO of Barclays Bank. And I didn't realise it was that easy to close a bank. And then invited us down to a meeting. So again, I think all football supporters of all clubs have benefited massively from that £30 price cap. I remember the first meeting going down to London, and Richard Scudamore literally laughing in our faces and was trying to convince us that we get our football far too cheaply. Well, if you're on a huge salary like he is, he was trying to quote things like the Super Bowl and Wimbledon and the Open Golf and the places they pay for tickets.
So just touching on what Jazz said before, about the that so-called Big Six Fan Breakaway League. Imagine what their prices would have been, £100 a ticket easily.
Right, out of touch, aren't they? These people with the reality. You've done a fantastic job, Dave, as part of that.
And that's where, to be honest with you, I think Everton Football Club needs to be applauded for the way they confronted the scurrilous six as that.
No, horrible. And at the end of the day,
they challenged them at the Premier League. It was us that moved all emotions and moved the discussions and started the debate, because that would have killed football in this country. And that's not just about the scurrilous six. That's about the European elite looking to drop. When you look at
hold monopoly, Dave. Hold monopoly over everybody else.
And it was about it being a close shot. And it was about the Italians and the Spaniards not being able to compete because of Premier League football. So they wanted to abort Premier League football.
Guaranteed revenues. It was guaranteed revenue streams because they knew what league they were going to be in every season, how much they were getting. Yeah. How's that fair?
Well, the ironic thing about them meetings for the price caps, is Richard Scudamore went on to say how charitable the Premier League was and how charitable all the clubs are within the Premier League. And one of the things he went on, he didn't actually say it, but he implied it. that the Premier League and the clubs do lots of really good work. It doesn't particularly see fans doing that much work.
Wow.
From a charity point of view. So coming back.
He's got Z cars, signs going off.
So coming back on the train, we had a discussion, and the unique thing about the Walton constituency in Liverpool, it's the only constituency in the country to have 2 Premier League football clubs in it. Unfortunately, 6 of the 8 wards within that constituency are amongst the most socially and economically deprived. So you've got these 2 big mega businesses with turnovers of hundreds of billions of pounds right in the heart of the community, with very little or none of that income rippling down into the local community. We attended a meeting in Christchurch the following day after the meeting in the Premier League. There was a queue round the block, and we thought we were popular because there was a big queue to come to the meeting we were speaking at. Ironically enough, it was a queue for a food bank. What was just about to run out of food. So for us, that was the light bulb moment. We said, right, we need to use football as a vehicle to tackle the humanitarian crisis that's going on, not just in this city, but in every major town and city throughout the whole of the UK. That there's people sleeping in shop doorways, there's people not able to feed themselves. The following day, Everton played Man United, and courtesy of a donated wheelie bin off Liverpool City Council, we done a food bank collection outside the Winslow. 230 odd consecutive games later, up to COVID starting off, we've gone from collecting in the wheelie bin to collecting on average a ton of food per game. That meant 30% of all the food collected and donated to the North Liverpool Food Bank was getting collected and donated outside Anfield and Goodison Park. We ran into COVID, which caused a number of problems. Fortunately, fan supporting food banks had grown to such a degree that there was a national network. If you cast your mind back, initially in the first tranche of games during COVID, they were free to anyone who subscribed to a satellite channel. By the time we got into the second phase of COVID, the Premier League and the broadcasters decided that they charge £15 per game via pay-per-view.
Yeah.
So we launched a national campaign, and because we had the waiver with fans across the whole of the country, the first live game was Newcastle versus Man United on a Friday night, and the Newcastle United food bank collected £40,000 for that one game on the basis of boycott pay-per-view. Donate to your local food bank. Second game up was Aston Villa. Aston Villa collected nearly £80,000 on the back of the game that they had. The next game up, ironically enough, was Liverpool versus Sheffield United. Fan supporting food banks on Merseyside collected £156,000 on the back of that game.
Wow.
We were extremely fortunate for a number of reasons, none more so than it coincided with Everton refunding season ticket money to fans. And we couldn't work out why we were getting all these £39 donated. Basically, people getting the money off Everton and donating it to the food bank. So much so, I got summons to a Zoom call with the Premier League the following day. I said to the Premier League at the time, I think since 1992, the Premier League has got most things right. However, what you've just done is probably the biggest PR disaster, and you haven't just shot yourselves in the foot. You've blown your legs off. Now, you were concentrating on the amounts of money that we've raised over them 3 or 4 games that you've tried to operate under the pay-per-view system. We've now got a database with 40,000 fans on who all think we're right and all think you're wrong, and we're going to continue with this campaign. 48 hours later, the Premier League met, and all the games went back to free-to-air to all their subscribers. So again, I think that was another significant victory for fan activism and for fans working together collectively, for fans their tribal differences to one side.
Can I jump on that question? Because I understand why that would happen. Certainly COVID times, people struggling with money and didn't really have £15 to then go and pay to go and watch the team, which is understandable. But a lot of the TV money gets reinvested back into the clubs, obviously. So would none of that money of the £15 from all these people go back into the pot and then filter back through into, for example, Everton's pockets?
I think if everybody paid the £15, that'll get divvied up across everyone. I think that the fact of the matter was, if the Premier League had said £9.99, people probably would have gone with it. But the fact that they went for £15 per game, and the fact that fans wouldn't stand for that, and said, well, do you know what? I'm not going to pay you £15. I'm going to give it to my community who needs the money. And I think that was the point. They were too greedy, too quick, if you like it. Instead of having a relatively cheaper option, they were just going £15 straight away.
I do remember this.
I think what was really interesting about it, to be honest with you, Ryan, the Football Supporters Association nationally, they was varying views, and people were saying, well, a fiver would be acceptable, or a 10 would be acceptable. Others were saying, no, it should be free at the points of need. And the reality of it is, all the Premier League clubs had already had their television revenues anyway.
Okay.
The Premier League and the broadcasters were claiming that
hardship
£15 fee what was to cover their broadcast expenses. But the reality
didn't also the Premier League has to give a rebate to the broadcasters as well?
I believe so eventually.
Yeah.
But the thing about covering their expenses for outside broadcasts, all them games were already covered by outside broadcast expenses because they were getting sent to a global audience around the world. So there was no additional expense to them broadcasting them games, and that was driven by pure greed.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. Obviously, there's many different opinions on whether how much you should pay for that content, and where that money goes to is also quite important. But at the time, when fans were struggling, there was no way that anyone should be forced to pay £15 to follow their team, especially when we all know you can type on the internet and find access to any game for free if you really want to. So it seemed a bit strange, and I imagine that, along with the 20s Plenty campaign and the work you've done with the food banks, etc., in general, and all the fan activism, is something you'll really be proud of. I want to steer everyone in the direction of the Fan Advisory Board, which is the main reason we're here. And also, I think the purpose of this video, perhaps I'm hoping you'll come back on in the future, and this will be one of a few videos we can get you on, because I think this is a good way for the average fan just watching this now, just to meet you guys and to understand who is representing them on the Fan Advisory Board. And I think this is quite relevant. I think it's something you guys should try and get involved in more. I know you're very, very busy.
And I think, Ryan, it's more about showing you the faces and personalities as well. It's not just Dave and myself. You know what I mean?
Well, no, bring whoever wants to come on. I'd be honoured, Jazz, if you can set up the connections and get them on. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to go to the comments, because I know we've got to wrap up on the hour mark.
Can I ask a quick one?
In different ways. Go on.
So obviously what the Fan Advisory Board has just started. So what is the plan for the next 12 months, Dave or Jazz? So what are we trying to achieve?
So it's obviously brand new at the moment. We're 3 weeks in. So at the moment, it's more about us doing sort of internal analysis and seeing what communication channels we're going to use, whether that's a website, whether that's social media, how we can make sure that all the policies and procedures are in place to make sure that we are effective, we are engaging with the fans, and we are engaging with the club. There's quite a bit of work going on in terms of the operational groups that I mentioned before. From the very outset, it is clear that the Fan Advisory Board is not to step on anyone's toes who already has the structured dialogue. So, for example, one of the objectives is stadium, and this is probably one of the easier ones to sort of explain that difference on. So if you think about the organisations I mentioned before, you've got Everton Women's Supporters Club. So anything to do with Bolton Hall Park, they should be the prime organisation to go to. If we're talking about Goodison and Bramley Moor, then it could be anything to do with the fan-facing issues, catering offerings. Then that should go to the Fans Forum. If it's something to do with accessibility issues, that should go to EDSA, which is Everton Disabled Sports Association. If it's to do with siting a museum in the pump house at Bramley Moor Dock, then that should go to Everton Heritage Society. So all these organisations are already in place and operating at the operational level. Where the fan advisory board is, that's the next level up, if you like. So that's more strategy. So we should be sort of probing questions in terms of where the stadium finances are coming from, stadium naming rights, and I mean just to sort of cite a few examples there. However, if there is sort of cross-party work and the Fans Forum and EDSA both turn around and Sports Club Committee turn around and say we've got one common issue here, it's all related to Goodison, then and they're not happy with the answers they're getting at the level that they engage with the club, then they can escalate that and we can do cross-party work and at the strategic level, because the club have committed already that we'll be meeting a minimum of 4 times with the board.
So you're just obviously the closest connection to the board that the fans and these groups could reach, and that is good. But also, I'm glad you touched on that for our viewers, that these parties that are already existing and coexist will stay there and handle each of their own departments, where the fan advisory board is above that and can look at more strategic matters. And that's something I've been asked also in the comments. Damien Hagan said, what does the fans, he meant the Fans Forum, he's now corrected himself. What does the fan advisory board do? Do they have say in transfers? Do they go to business meetings? And I know, Jazz, you mentioned to me you dropped in on a call the other day and Farhad Mashiri was on the call. And I believe were you away at the time or something?
So that wasn't through the fan advisory board. That was from the shareholders association. So the shareholders association for about 5-6 years now have been pushing for that meeting with Mr. Mashiri and the majority shareholder. Now that finally came to fruition the other week.
Can you divulge anything to us?
Was it, sorry?
Can you divulge anything to us about?
Afraid not, mate. It's it was a meeting between shareholders in effect. So that's for John Blaine as the chair of the shareholders association to work in that sort of realm. And to be honest, I wouldn't have even mentioned it if it hadn't already been sort of public knowledge. But it did take place.
Are either of you on the are part of, or I know there are certain members that are on the fan advisory board that are on the 27 campaign. I mean, what are your thoughts on? Can that work objectively when you're trying to, if you are on the campaign, to be on the fan advisory board as well?
I don't see why not. Ultimately, the Everton supporter base is very diverse. It's got a lot of opposing thoughts, ideals. Just there's 2 of us here on the call now. I personally wasn't at the protest the other day. Dave, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. I think what you've also got to factor into all of this, myself, Jazz, Julie, and Tony, who were on the fan advisory board, were elected onto it by the wider fan base.
Yeah.
I attended the 27 demo on Saturday for a number of reasons, to be honest with you, none more so than I'm supposed to reflect, in my opinion, the views of the wider fan base. I turned up and spoke to people. I seen the strength of their feeling. And I've got to say, in fairness to them, I thought the protest on Saturday was quite respectful.
Yeah.
I think previously there was a lot of talk on social media about it being aggressive and about it being toxic.
I mean, as I say, protests are welcome and I get it, but as you're right, Dave, when it turns violent, and it wasn't at all, by the way, just making that very clear. Obviously, you get the twat on the Saturday night defacing Goodison, and never acceptable doing that to our lady. They're never acceptable.
Absolutely, and I think and that really is the issue. That I will stand toe to toe with anybody who says that people can't peacefully protest. It's something that we should all be encouraging. We should all be supportive of. And I said, I turned up at that, and I was quite impressed by what I'd witnessed and what I'd seen. I'm not part of the 27 campaign.
So I was going to ask you.
I'm highly unlikely ever to be either, because unfortunately there's not enough hours in the day. But I will stand toe to toe with them to fight for their right to peacefully protest, as long as they're peaceful and respectful.
Thanks, Dave. I'm glad you went to that. Obviously, you said you're not part of the campaign, but also important in your role on the Fan Advisory Board to be able to understand what's happening. And Jazz, you'd say there are quite a few problems. The fans are aggravated, and you'd say it would all come under the umbrella of on-the-pitch performance at the end of the day. That's why people turn attention to those in charge. If you go for a meal, it's not a good analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway. If you go for a meal in a restaurant, the chef might direct you to the manager. You know, you kind of blame those at the top ultimately for the performance. What would you say the key areas of concern are coming into the Fan Advisory Board are now for you? I know that's a difficult question, but what really stands out to you as something you really want to put your stamp on right now, considering what's going on within the club?
I don't know. It's difficult, and we need to see sort of how the dust settles, I suppose. Now, look, there's no getting away from the fact that over the last 6 years, lots of money's been spent and wasted. You know what I mean? And that there are people within the football club, whether there's still no appointments or not, who were involved during that period. From a personal point of view, I've had good relationships with them. We spoke about before from the Fans Forum, and when the fan-led review process was happening, I approached the club and asked if we could make this a fan-led process. I was supported by senior people within the club to do that. We went right the way through, and there wasn't any interference, and that's what resulted in the creation of this ESSG that Dave mentioned before. We went right through the process. We were carrying out surveys of fans. We were speaking to sort of member organisations, and we gave this proposal, which was a fan-led proposal, to the club. Now, the fact that we've got to the Fan Advisory Board now shows that the club have been willing to work with fans and get to this stage. So, me personally, look, people have different ways of working. I'd rather work with somebody to try and make things better than work against them. That's me. The consensus that the Fan Advisory Board takes, we're going to look at all the priorities that we had in our meeting the other day, and we need to agree which ones out of all these different sort of work strands are the priority. As I say, we had an introductory meeting with the club at the sort of beginning of July, and we followed that up with an independent Fan Advisory Board meeting. It's pretty short order because we wanted to have this before we went to America. We're going to have another meeting early next month, and that's where we're going to get together and turn around. And we've all been sort of doing a lot of background research activity, and when we sort of re-meet at the beginning of next month, we're going to sit down and say, well, these are all the different work strands at the moment. Which ones do we feel we should be putting more emphasis behind? Which ones are more achievable, if there are any quick wins, and try and identify our priorities as a group, as opposed to Jazz's priority is this, Dave's priority is that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to you, I meant as a group really as well, but it also just interesting to know what your thoughts are as just an average fan coming into that, thinking how can we change things. Now from my perspective, there's a lot of things that I worry about. You know, last season I was frustrated. These might sound quite trivial, but we were really struggling, obviously, on the pitch, and we had the away players in a porter cabin, running out past their own fans. You know, to
that was because of Premier League mandated zones. There wasn't so.
But
we get back to normal.
Other clubs had the fans back in the tunnels and stuff. I felt like I feel like what the point I'm making is that Everton are a little bit too soft in the way we carry out things.
I think why it's because
are we trying to be too moral at times when actually we want to be successful? And find a balance between the two is quite important. And that's something maybe I should ask Dave. You mentioned about the stage sponsorship. This is quite important right now. You weren't happy we went with a betting company. But Everton, in the financial mess we're in, can we afford to choose who we can and can't get when the club is struggling so badly in that position?
But just touching on the meeting with Sherry that Jazz expertly battered away. I will touch on that.
Politician.
Albeit being briefly. That meeting took place. We waited 6 years for that meeting to take place. So, in my opinion, it was 6 years too late. However, the meeting did take place. Now, the meeting was informal because I know lots of people have been saying on social media, make the minutes available. Well, it was an informal meeting or no minutes were taken, and there was no agenda. There was no preset terms and conditions other than we'd have an informal chat. Personally, my own view was I thought the meeting went better than I expected it to, so much so that there was a commitment from the owner to have another meeting face to face as and when that can be put in, which I think is a real positive. And that's the sort of thing that the clubs we talk about. I think we started this discussion off by about fan engagement. I think all the fans want the owner of the club to have a dialogue with fans and not Jim White on talk.
Right. Okay, Dave. You just touched on so fan advisory board. Is this going to be formal? Are you going to be formal meetings?
No.
Do they have an agenda?
No. There will be agenda.
Again, so these aren't going to be meetings that we get to see as regular fans.
The fan advisory board, that there's going to be, you potentially won't see the agenda, but the minutes will be declared public. It's right. Obviously the process that happens is we have the meeting. Within a couple of weeks, we'll have a draft version of minutes, but they'll go around for an internal sort of review and amendments. And then when we have the next meeting, the first port of business is to authorize the previous minutes. So that will be made public record. It may be a month later than when the meeting took place, but that's due to process.
On a monthly basis, Jazz, then?
By the way, sorry to interrupt. I know we've got to let Jazz go at past on the dot, and I have so many questions here, and I need concise answers now. So I'm just going to whiz through as best as I can with that. Obviously, if the minutes become available, that ultimately that's what we want to see. The Mashiri interview, I'm pleased you got the interview.
But again, that was Shareholders Association as opposed to.
I know a lot of things on here, guys. You're watching have been crossed over from different groups, from different parts of this. So I apologise if it's not completely clear, but we are trying our best to get things across. I would like to probe you on that interview. I know I'm not going to get to find out what you asked him, and you'll batter me away like a politician. But I'm pleased you did manage to get to speak to him as a separate entity to the Fan Advisory Board, and that's what I want to focus on for the next 18 minutes. Bob just dropping in saying impressive interviewing, Ryan. Thank you very much, Bob. I've got people asking general questions about football. I think maybe that's another time. A quick filey, would you have Ross Barkley back, yes or no? That's you, Jazz. I think we've lost Dave, won't it? Jazz, would you have Ross Barkley back?
I don't know. I don't like the way you left, to be honest, but if he improves the squad, improves the team, I'm open to it.
Let's be honest, Jazz. He as I say, he needs, if he comes back, he does improve the squad. He does need to take a pay cut, and he does need to say sorry for what he did. And you know what? Let's get behind him, because at the end of the day, he is a Blue. Come on.
Okay. Now
let's see if he signs on the dotted line before I congratulate him.
Let's see, mate. Let's see.
That was just a question. I'm no inside knowledge there. Just got people coming in with the quick questions. Because I want to maximise the time I've got with you, and I know there's only 12 minutes left. I hope Dave comes back on, but if he doesn't, and thank you so much, Dave, for coming in. I'm assuming his battery's died. Jack is saying there was Everton group started to tackle toxicity on YouTube. Some channels need two-footing. That's quite interesting. From Jack, he's agreeing with you. He's saying you're spot on.
You must have had a few bevies.
Wednesday night, it's acceptable.
This is a question, Jazz. I need concise and straight answers. Dave, when you have an owner who is more interested in listening to football agents than actually building a structured club, what chance do the Fan Advisory Board have?
Good question.
Yeah, so if you look at it, he doesn't hold an executive position within the club. He is the majority shareholder. The fan advisory board is dealing direct with the board, so the executive and non-executive directors on that board. I'm not sure whether I've answered it or not, but ultimately it's the majority owner. If he interferes or makes decisions that affect the club, that's not from the executive.
So this is what people have, from my experience, I'm on Twitter a lot. People are concerned that Farhad Moshiri is dictating the transfers, effectively vetoing transfers, and listening to agents and being more easily influenced. And one of the criticisms was on Marcel Brands perhaps not being allowed to actually do his job. Have you got anything to comment on that, either of you, about?
To be honest, that's where the fan advisory board. It's nothing to do with on-field performance or the sport inside the house. It's all about the fans having an interest in the strategic direction, partnerships, etc., and the way the club operates outside of the 90 minutes on the pitch, if you like. So it's not even within our remit. Even we can ask the questions, but but not the club aren't duty bound to give us the response, if you like.
Yeah, okay. That's really good. Mabbsy, have you got anything you'd like to ask the boys while we've got them? Fan advisory board.
Yeah, so have you asked for fan representation on the board, or is that something Everton are looking at, or do we know?
So when the ESSG put the recommendations to the club, there's two recommendations. One was for fan directors and one was for the creation of a fan advisory board. Now the club turned around to us at the time and said, park the fan directors chat for now. We'll speak to the fan advisory board, which you can have once that's in place. So as I said before, we had our first meeting 3 weeks ago. We've created a lot of work strands, and we're having that chat within us internally to work out which one of those are our priority works. Do we want to, and then ultimately that information will come out when we've decided what work strands have got what priority.
So you think I think one of the really interesting things as well about fan advisory boards, and I'm not just talking exclusively about Everton. Eventually, this will be legislation, so that there'll be a white paper drama, and there'll be a number of things. And one of the things recommended by Tracy Crouch was about a fan director being on the board. There's things like about fan advisory boards having a golden ticket, which will enable them to veto certain things, particularly in relation to club names, club colours, club badges, moving at the stadium, etc. So I think what we've got to look at, fan advisory boards, not just at Everton Football Club, but at all clubs. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. It's the first chapter, if you like, something that will eventually end up getting legislated for. And I think that'll be irrespective of whether it's a Tory government or a Labour government. I think both political parties are basically saying that is the route that they want to go down.
Can I ask you then for scenario, because I just think perhaps it's still a little bit unclear as to what the fan advisory board is going to do, because a lot of us want to see fan representation on the board. So if Everton wanted to do something in particular, there's someone who represents the fan base and our objectives who could potentially veto it or at least vote on it. But could you give us just an example of something that perhaps they would say to you about from a higher level? What would they ask you to do?
I suppose that's a question for a couple of months' time. Obviously, we were only formed on the 7th of July. So that there's, as I mentioned before, there's an organisation called the ESSG that did all the groundwork to get to this stage of the creation of the fan advisory board. So that meeting we had at the very beginning of July was hosted by Everton, because they held all of our sort of personal data. They invited us all together, and then the ESSG basically handed over their responsibility as a sort of interim organisation to the fan advisory board, and then sort of dissolved. So our next meeting with the club isn't scheduled until September, and that gives us 3 months now to try and work up, get our infrastructure in place, work out our priorities, and before we come back to meet with the club. So we haven't actually had any direct work meetings with the club, if that makes sense. But obviously the clue's in the name, isn't it? It's going to be sort of fan advisory board. So when the club are talking about, I don't know, let's rewind 12 months. They may have been talking about who our main kit sponsor is going to be, and they at that time they may have turned around and said we are looking at Stake, who's a betting company, and then within the fan advisory board we'll turn around and give them what our thoughts are as elected members of the fan base in to counter that. Now the club aren't duty bound to listen to us.
Yeah.
So we can give the advice, but ultimately the decision sits with the club. It's being involved with the process and being made aware of the process before it gets there. So we may not be able to speak about the Stake being the company who it is. However, when it finally becomes public, we can turn around and say, well, do you know what? We got told about this 9 months ago. Our consensus view was this.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing that the fans out there, and it is a learning curve. And I think what fans need to understand is the fan advisory board is totally independent. We are there to represent the fans. And I'll give you an example of that. At the one meeting that we have had, where the ESSG and the club and ourselves came together, the only item of business that the fan advisory board dealt with was the election of its officers. And whilst the election of the officers took place, the CEO and a board member and all club staff were asked to leave the meeting whilst we conducted independently fan advisory board business. I think it's really important that people realise that the fan advisory board will be totally independent of the club. It's there to serve the interests.
And can say and believe in whatever they feel to believe in, and not a puppet of the club or dictated to how they want to be portrayed. That is the most important thing from my perspective, is that you guys represent us and not the interests of what those are there, because we could otherwise there'd be no point of doing this. I suppose the only thing that confuses me slightly is what gets delegated to the fans forum, what becomes part of the fan advisory board. And if it's okay with you, Jazz, perhaps in another quarter we could check in with you or a member of the fans advisory board, just to find out a little bit more about what's been going on in those initial 3 months. I know there's things like sleeve sponsors, and I'm getting questions about things. I'm not quite sure how relevant they are. In the last couple of minutes, just a couple of final questions, if that's okay. By the way, if you're enjoying this, make sure you like and subscribe. A real pleasure to have Jazz and Dave on here. And there's another stream coming up at past.
Almost sounds like a band, that, doesn't it? Jazz and Dave.
It's certainly not a boy band, Jay.
Backstreet Boys reunion. We've got another stream coming up in 10 minutes or so with Yandalf and Dan. They're going to be talking about Everton signing Dwight McNeil from Burnley, who was playing for them last season. 1 assist, no goals last season. I've got to ask you two while I've got you here, because I'm going to end up on Football Matters. Jazz, Dwight McNeil, are you getting excited? Because a lot of these names this summer aren't really getting me off my toes, but would you be happy?
You know what? If he's on our books, he's not going to score against us, is he? Not going to score no 25-yard bangers into the top pin.
Dave, would you be happy to see that one go over the line? Obviously, Viagra joined today.
Well, picking up on what Jazz just said, he was probably one of the few players that got me off my seat last season when he scored that absolute screamer. I suspect that it's unfortunately a once in a career opportunity that he buried. But I've got a simple outlook, to be honest with you. I tend not to pass comments on players who were linked with or managers who were linked with.
He's here for a medical, Dave. He's currently having a medical right now.
Yeah.
As he's smiling. Having a medical, it's happening.
He's already done the photos, hasn't he?
What I was going to go on to say, that once they become a player, whether I like or dislike them, they've got my support while they're wearing the royal blue jersey.
Brilliant. And I think the reality is Everton last season didn't really have anyone with a left foot who could play on the wing and deliver a cross. And you could argue, hopefully now, under a better regime, maybe better forward in Calvert-Lewin, he'll get some assists.
Had the wing back who could deliver a cross with the left foot.
Definitely. And that'll come up in a minute's time. I think just before we wrap up, I've got one comment from Yandalf, who will actually be hosting this next video. This is important. Do you feel the club are open to viewing supporters as stakeholders and therefore as having some say in the direction of the club rather than existing as purely a non-binary advisory role. Thank you for that.
I absolutely do. If you look at where the recommendations came from, is the fan-led review report that we've mentioned already several times. One of the advisors for that panel was our CEO. So she's been invested in the process from the beginning. She'll be very keen to make sure it's not just paid lip service to.
I'm sorry, I've got one more thing to ask you, completely irrelevant.
One more thing.
His claims that the 27 campaign defaced Goodison, or is he throwing baseless accusations out?
I haven't witnessed anybody doing it. I've seen pictures. I don't know whether that's current or not, and I don't know about it. I'm speaking in.
Just a comment for you, Mabbsy. Can Mabbsy back up his claims that the 27 campaign defaced Goodison, or is he throwing?
Hang on. No, I did not accuse the 27 campaign of defacing Goodison.
Yeah, I didn't read it.
I said there was fans that let us down. I didn't say the 27 campaign was involved. I actually said that it was a peaceful protest. Did not accuse the 27 campaign of anything at all. I just said there was someone that let us down. Didn't say it was 27. I just said someone.
Yeah, no, I never heard that either. So I don't know where that's come from.
No, I'm not accused of the 27 campaign at all.
I don't know why Dave Wycherley has retweeted that either, because that's not correct. Listen, guys, I just want to thank you as well. I know you're going to play football, Jazz, so thank you so much for coming on. I know it was difficult. Things are flying in different directions with it's hard to interpret a lot of things as well. But you know what? It was really candid and nice to be able to sit with you both and just talk about everything to do with Everton matters. And I think maybe in 6 months' time, it would be good to check in with you again and find out what you've been achieving, what's been going on, hopefully from a position where Everton are doing strong in the league, and Dwight McNeil and Vinagre are linking up down that left flank, and the Calvert-Lewin is tapping them in week in, week out. Dave, keep up the good work as well. I'd be intrigued to catch up with you again. And of course, Mabbsy, adding in some really lovely input. So thanks. I could sit and talk to you for another hour, but I know I've got to let you two go. If you like the channel, subscribe. We'll be back. And in a few minutes' time, Yandav's going to be on giving a full reaction to the news that Everton are signing Dwight McNeil, apparently. From Burnley. How imaginative. And that's all I'm going to say to end it. So thanks, guys. See you soon. Take care.
Cheers, guys. In a bit.